Well, my name is Shawn Mulligan. I'm with the National Park Service. My background, I was just remarking to a few of the panelists as we were getting ready to speak today, that 25 years ago, I was sitting where you were sitting, representing a variety of citizens group on environmental issues throughout the country, on hazardous waste issues around the country. So really value what you guys bring to the equation. And one of the themes, certainly, that Lisa mentioned, and one of the themes of the National Park Service today and moving forward on these sites is we're very eager to get the local community flavor with respect to these types of sites. One of the criteria that the National Park Service looks at when we're cleaning up these sites is what does the local populace think about what we're proposing to do. So that's really important to us. Currently, I'm a senior program advisor for the National Park Service. I work for the National Park Service on a variety of solid and hazardous waste issues throughout the entire National Park Service units. Right now we have about 390 plus National Park Service units. We have stewardship obligations for millions of acres around this country. As you might surmise, being the steward for that many millions of acres, we occasionally run across contaminated sites. On a day-to-day basis, my program and practice area is addressing contaminated sites throughout the National Park Service units. Today we're going to talk about the Anacostia sites. My initial presentation was initially tiered off of what the district was going to say on a variety of these sites. Paul is joining us up here. I think another one of the themes we want to talk about is I think it's important when we talk about systematic, comprehensive approaches to hazardous substance sites, we talk about the various obligations, roles, responsibilities, and authorities of the various sovereigns around the table. You have representatives of the federal government here, with Ron, with EPA, me with the Park Service. Then we have representation from the district with Paul. So what I think we'll be providing representatives of the district and the National Park Service is our perspective on these sites, and certainly want to communicate that we're working very closely with our partners. Sometimes we don't have the exact same interest to represent, but we're attempting to work very collegial, very constructively, ensuring we comprehensively address these sites. And I think when we talk about National Park Service presence at contaminated sites, specifically I'll be talking about the Poplar Point site, the Washington Gas site, and the Kenilworth Site. I think it bears in mind what is the National Park Service doing with respect to the site. What are our response authorities? What are our obligations to the local community? And so when the National Park Service has a contaminated site under its jurisdiction, control, custody, or or has management responsibility, the National Park Service is the authority under the Superfund statute, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. We are the lead agency for purposes of determining the presidential delegated course of action at the site. That means we are there to determine the full nature and extent of contamination at these sites, to assess the human health and ecological risks posed by the site, to identify and analyze alternatives to ensure that these sites appropriately clean up the contamination, to make sure that public involvement happens with respect to the process. We additionally have an obligation to select a response action that is fully protective of human health and the environment. We take these obligations seriously. We think they dovetail well with the Organic Act of the National Park Service, that statute that created the National Park Service, which requires that we protect resources throughout the National Park Service system for future generations. So we think the authorities of CERCLA and the authorities of the Organic Act dovetail well to ensure we take actions fully protective of human health and the environment. We also have the rights, authority, and obligation to ensure that those parties that bear equitable and legal responsibility for the contamination join us at the table to ensure that contamination, the cost of the contamination are borne for those parties responsible for it. With that being said, let me turn to the specific sites where the National Park Service is undertaking response action as the president for purposes of Superfund along the Anacostia. We have a number of sites. We're working closely with US EPA and the district on all of these sites. Let's start with the Washington Gas site. In talking with Chris beforehand, he indicated that there were a number of individuals with various degrees of knowledge around these sites. For my use in tailoring what I say today, how many of you are environmental lawyers? Environmental scientist? Okay. Other? Thank you. And in the time allotted to me, 10 minutes, it's difficult to go into a lot of detail. So I'm going to cover these fairly quickly. I've got now, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. And hopefully in the question and answer time period, we'll have the ability to go into greater detail. In addition, the National Park Service has generated and distributed to various entities fact sheets which have more information regarding where we are in the Superfund process. As I understand my responsibilities today, one of the things I wanted to do is echo Lisa's comments with respect to that. The Secretary, the Director of the National Park Service, the local superintendent, Alex Romero, the regional director have indicated these are a top priority for the National Park Service. We are marshaling resources and hundreds of thousands of dollars on an annual basis to address these sites. We believe that cleanup cost at all these sites will be in excess of millions of dollars. So we're working very closely with our colleagues at Department of Justice, our co-counsel, in some cases at the district, opposing counsel in some cases at the district, and working with our colleagues to EPA to make sure that we have a systematic, comprehensive approach to these sites. Regarding the Washington Gas site, that is a site that many of you are familiar with. The National Park Service origins with respect to this site stem from the 4.2 acre site that the National Park Service happened to manage in between the private operations of the Washington Gas Light Company and the Anacostia. So the National Park Service was put in a fairly unique situation of being a buffer between private contamination source into the Anacostia. EPA, the District of Columbia, and Washington Gas had an approach to the private parcel. The United States government, through the National Park Service in 2006, selected a remedy that was a terrestrial dig and remove source material and adoption under the assumption that it was working efficiently, a groundwater pump and treat system which would extract materials coming off the Washington Gas site before it reached the Anacostia. We are currently, so the National Park Service has selected a response action 2006. In 2008, the National Park Service land was transferred to the District of Columbia. The National Park Service and District of Columbia had a series of discussions as to whether or not the selected remedy in 2006 of the National Park Service appropriately met the needs, desires, and wants of the District of Columbia. We entered into agreement in 2008, and we are currently in negotiations with Washington Gas as co-sovereigns, as co-plaintiffs, entering into consent decree negotiations with Washington Gas, whereby Washington Gas would implement the remedy selected by the National Park Service vis-a-vis the former National Park Service property, where Washington Gas would enter into a review of the pump and treat system to make sure that it's fully efficacious in stopping any contamination from entering the Anacostia. In addition, the third component of work would be the implementation of a comprehensive remedial investigation, a study to determine nature and extent of contamination, and a feasibility study to analyze alternatives for sediments that we believe are linked to Washington gas operations at the site. In addition, there would be the standard obligations of Washington Gas to pay past response costs of the District of Columbia as well as the National Park Service, and to perform all work under the oversight of the National Park Service and District of Columbia. Those negotiations are ongoing. In addition, we have the 2010 December overlay of local citizens groups, some of whom may be represented today. They filed a notice of intent to sue, 90-day notice for alleged violations of RCRA against the District of Columbia as well as Washington Gas, and that is still out there. It's my belief that the 90 days hasn't run yet, and we'll see how that affects the dynamics, if any, with respect to the Washington Gas negotiations. With respect to the Kenilworth Site, this was a site that the National Park Service and the United States government authorized the District of Columbia to operate a municipal landfill for a number of years. It closed in the early 70s, so there's municipal solid waste operations that took place. We have a historic landfill. We talked a little bit earlier with respect to Washington Gas, where we were in the Superfund process. And again, this is a site that the National Park Service is addressing under the Superfund statute. We've completed a remedial investigation, a study of nature and extent of contamination at the landfill. We've assessed risk associated with the landfill, and we are a couple months out from distributing publicly a feasibility study, which is the lead agency's determination, identification of ways to fix the problem. Once we issue that feasibility study, that will become a public document. We will put together a proposed response action, the best way to fix the landfill. That will go out for public comment, public review. We will look very closely at those public comments to see if we have to modify our proposed plan. Once we review the comments, respond to the comments, then the National Park Service will select a remedy for the site, and it is our goal, our intent, and our desire to make sure that any proposed response action at the site fully conforms to public views of what we should do with the site, recognizing there's a disparate view. We're very aware that the district and the National Park Service want to ensure that there's a capability for full recreation at that site, and our remedy will certainly address that. On the enforcement side, with respect to that matter, the National Park Service and the District of Columbia are involved in equitable and legal negotiations to address how cleanup at that site will take place, what is the share of the United States government, and what is the share of the District of Columbia. Turning to the third site, which is the Poplar Point site, which is a site many of you may be familiar with. It's a site that has had a number of historic uses throughout time. We've had the operations of the District of Columbia, nursery operations with associated herbicide and pesticide releases. We've had a parallel operation by the architect of the Capitol. We had a naval station that operated there for a number of decades, starting in the 1940s. Right now it serves as the operations for the National Capital Park East, headquarters, as well as Park Police. And the property is subject to transfer based upon certain predicates, so at some point it might become the district's site to manage. National Park Service, exercising its Superfund authorities, has entered into an agreement with the District of Columbia to perform a comprehensive remedial investigation, the study that determines nature and extent of contamination, as well as the feasibility study. The feasibility study, which is the alternative that identifies and analyzes alternatives. The district is performing under that agreement. The district also has an obligation under that agreement to pay our cost. Simultaneously with the district performing the remedial investigation feasibility study at the side, The federal government and the District of Columbia are engaged in negotiations right now for an equitable allocation